don't eat carbs. Carbs make you fat. Insulin, you need to be in ketosis by a lot of waffling. And then you end up being bullied into doing the ketogenic diet that you stay on for 4 weeks and then you rebound. In this video, I hope to clear up some common misconceptions, educate you about carbs, how they're used, and what carbs to eat when. So they're actually your body's preferred energy source, especially for higher intensity activity, so they can help you with your performance in the gym and help you have better workouts. Next set. Let's talk storage. When you consume carbohydrates, they get broken down into smaller pieces and eventually they turn into glucose. Glucose gets sent to different bodily tissues, for example muscle tissue, for them to carry out their basic functions. Any glucose that doesn't get used and any that's left over will get stored in your liver or in your muscle cells in the form of glycogen. But carbohydrates are the main reason you feel bloated after a heavy meal. This is because 1 gram of glycogen binds to 3 grams of water, and this added water is what creates that bloating effect. That's also why when you go out for a meal, if you weigh yourself the next morning, you'll probably see a spike in your weight, which is higher than usual. No need to panic, that's mostly due to the water weight from the previous meal the night before. Now, are all carbohydrate sources created equally? Yes and no. On one hand, 1 gram of glucose always has 4 calories, no matter where it comes from. However, on the other hand, different carbohydrate sources can be processed differently by the body. They can be classified based on how quickly the body absorbs them. I'm sure a lot of you are already familiar with the glycemic index, but for those of you who don't know, the glycemic index is a scale which runs from 0 to 100. It gives it a rating based on how quickly it's absorbed by the body. Anything with a GI score of 70 or above is defined as high GI. These are processed more quickly than the body. For example, rice cakes, dates, Haribos, white bread. These are for a quick boost of energy. Low GI generally has a score below 55. Like sweet potatoes, oats, these are generally more slow releasing carbs and they're not processed, they're not digested as quickly by the body. Then in the middle, brown bread, bananas, these generally have a GI score between 55 and 69. All of these carbohydrate sources do have their uses. If you want a quick carbohydrate or quick energy boost just before, just after, or during a workout, a high to moderate GI score carb would be suitable for you. Whereas, let's say you're training in a few hours, a lower GI carb will be more suitable for you because the energy is released more slowly and it'll be over a sustained period of time. Foods with lower glycemic index tend to have other nutrients mixed with it. So for example, the sweet potato has a low glycemic index because of all the fiber that it comes with. It slows down the digestion. It's worth noting that just because something is low GI doesn't always mean that it's healthy. And I'll touch on that with the fitness myths next. Carbohydrate myth number 1, carbs make you fat because insulin. Consuming too many carbohydrates can make you gain fat. However, consuming too much fat can make you gain fat. Consuming too much protein can make you gain fat. Anything with calories can make you gain fat if you consume too much of it. There's this idea that carbohydrates have some unique fat storage properties and that you should never consume them if you're trying to lose fat. This idea comes from the fact that when you eat carbohydrates, it's broken down into glucose. When your blood glucose increases, it stimulates the release of insulin, and insulin feeds nutrients into other cells, and this includes fat cells. And it can also stimulate lipogenesis, which is creation of new fat cells essentially. This is true. However, there's a few things that people don't consider. Firstly, insulin also stimulates the release of nutrients into your other cells, such as muscle, for example. Also, just because it creates new fat cells does not mean that it necessarily leads to overall weight gain or overall fat gain. Because if you're consuming less energy than you burn, fat will also be lost. Fat is just stored chemical energy, essentially. Study after study after study shows that there's no difference between low carb diets or high carb diets when it comes to fat loss when calories are equated, which just comes down to personal preference or any underlying health conditions that you might have. Myth number 2, low GI carbs are always healthier than high GI carbs. Low glycemic index carbs do come with a lot of micronutrients and a lot of fiber. That's not always the case. For example, sponge cake. Sponge cake technically is a low GI food while still being loaded with sugar and being very high in calories. This is because the additional fat in the sponge cake will slow down the release of carbs in the body. When it comes to selecting healthy foods, in fat loss or whatever conditions you might have, there are a lot of factors to consider. Now that concludes the video. Hope you found that useful. Don't forget to like, subscribe, follow for more of this nutrition series, and in a bit.